The tension in the room was suffocating. The air seemed to thicken as James Thomas's sharp words echoed, leaving the board members exchanging uneasy glances. No one dared to speak, each waiting for someone else to break the silence. Joseph Sullivan finally cleared his throat, his voice barely above a murmur. "James." He began, hesitating as though choosing his words with the utmost care. "You have to understand the position we found ourselves in. When you suffered that heart attack, it threw everything into disarray. We had to act quickly to stabilize joint stock." James's jaw tightened, his fingers drumming slowly on the table. "And acting quickly involved betraying me? Collaborating with Global Communications, our fiercest rival." His voice was calm, yet each word landed like a hammer. "It wasn't betrayal," Eleanor Winters interjected, her voice tinged with desperation. "At first it was about preparing a contingency plan. But then Global Communications approached us with a proposal we thought was strategic." James's piercing gaze shifted to her. Strategic, his tone dripped with disdain. "Do explain." Joseph inhaled deeply, as if steadying himself. "It was a merger, James. A merger that would combine their resources with our innovation. Together we'd be unstoppable, a force capable of reshaping the industry." James let out a cold, humorless laugh. "Unstoppable? By dismantling everything joint stock represents? By selling our values for convenience?" His eyes scanned the room, settling on each member one by one. "Do any of you remember why I started this company? Why we fought so hard to succeed? Joint stock wasn't built for shortcuts or cozy alliances with competitors. It was built to innovate, to lead, and to maintain integrity in every decision." The board members squirmed in their seats, avoiding James's glare. He pulled a stack of papers from his briefcase and placed them firmly on the table, the slap of paper against wood reverberating in the silent room. "These," he began, his voice like steel, "are copies of every email, every memo, every shred of correspondence related to your dealings with Global Communications. I know exactly what each of you has done." Several faces around the table paled. Adam Boyd's hand twitched, his composure faltering. "So here's how this will go," James continued, his tone unwavering. "This so-called merger? Dead on arrival. Any discussions with Global Communications end now, permanently." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "As for the rest of you, you have two choices. First, you can resign from this board immediately, walk away and save what little dignity you have left, or you can stay and help me undo this mess you've created." James straightened, his presence commanding. "But let me be clear. If you choose to remain, you will be under my direct scrutiny. One misstep, one whisper of further deceit, and I will personally ensure you're blacklisted from this industry. Forever." The weight of his words hung heavy in the air, each board member processing the ultimatum. James leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Now make your decision." The room remained silent, the once confident board members now grappling with the gravity of their choices. James watched them with an unrelenting gaze, determined to restore his company and ensure that betrayal would never threaten it again. The room felt suffocating with tension as James Thomas's ultimatum hung in the air. The board members exchanged uncertain glances, the weight of his words pressing heavily on their shoulders. The moments stretched, each person battling their inner turmoil. Sharon Winters, the eldest board member, was the first to speak. Her voice wavered slightly but carried a tone of resolve. "I'll stay," she said, lifting her chin. "I made a mistake and I owe it to this company and to you to make it right." Her admission set off a ripple effect. One by one, other board members followed suit, their voices hesitant yet tinged with remorse. Not all, however, shared her conviction. Adam Boyd, visibly shaken, stood abruptly. "I can't do this," he muttered, avoiding James's piercing gaze. "I'll resign." By the time the meeting concluded, half of the original board had chosen to step down. James surveyed those who remained, his face a mixture of steely determination and grim acceptance. "Very well," he said, his tone clipped. For those of you staying, understand this: our work starts now. We have significant damage to repair, both internally and publicly." The remaining members nodded, their expressions serious as they gathered their belongings and filed out of the room. James, standing at the head of the long conference table, watched their retreating figures before noticing Joseph Sullivan lingering near the doorway. Joseph approached cautiously, his usual confident demeanor replaced by an air of regret. His eyes met James's, filled with unspoken apologies. "James," he began, his voice subdued, "I know I failed you, I betrayed your trust, and I don't expect you to forgive me. If you want me gone, I'll resign." James studied the man before him, someone who had once been a trusted friend and partner. The betrayal still burned, but James saw something in Joseph's eyes, a glimmer of the loyalty that had once bonded them. After a pause, James spoke, his voice low but firm. "You're right, Joseph. You did betray me, and it's going to take time, if it's even possible, to rebuild the trust you shattered." Joseph nodded, his shoulders sagging. "I understand. I'll clear out my office." James held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "I'm not done," he said, his tone sharp. "You're not resigning." Surprise flickered across Joseph's face. "You're keeping me." James's expression hardened, his eyes like steel. "Don't mistake this for forgiveness. I'm keeping you because you know every detail of what's happened, every piece of this mess. You're going to help me dig out the rot and fix what's broken. And let me be clear, this is your chance to prove you can still be the man I once trusted." Relief washed over Joseph's face, but it was tempered by the weight of James's words. He straightened, his voice steady. "I won't let you down, James. I swear it." James nodded, but his face remained unreadable. "We'll see. Now get to work. We've got a company to save." As Joseph turned to leave, James returned to his seat, the gravity of the moment settling over him. The road ahead would be arduous, fraught with challenges, but James was determined. He would restore joint stock, no matter the cost, and he would do it on his terms. As Joseph turned to leave, James Thomas's voice cut through the silence, sharp and commanding. "One more thing, Joseph. I need to know about Ashley." Joseph froze mid-step, his hand still on the door handle. He turned back, a puzzled expression clouding his face. "Ashley? What are you talking about, James?" James's gaze narrowed, his tone steady but laced with urgency. "The nurse from the hospital, the one who warned me about the board meeting. If it wasn't you or anyone on the board, then who was she? And how did she know?" Joseph shook his head slowly, genuine confusion etched across his features. "James, I've already told you I have no idea who this Ashley is. Maybe you misinterpreted something. You just had a heart attack, after all. Stress can do strange things to the mind." James's jaw tightened. He didn't believe Joseph was lying, not this time, but the mystery refused to unravel. As Joseph finally exited, closing the door softly behind him, James turned toward the expansive windows overlooking Washington, D.C. The city bustled with life below, the early afternoon sunlight glinting off steel and glass towers. Yet James felt an unshakable sense of unease. If Joseph and the board had nothing to do with Ashley, then who was she? How had she known about the conspiracy before he even suspected it? The questions gnawed at him, refusing to relent. He replayed every detail of his brief encounters with her, the urgency in her voice, the worry in her eyes. Ashley Thomas wasn't a figment of his imagination. She was real, and she held answers he needed. But where was she now? Why had she disappeared without a trace? The puzzle was growing more intricate, weaving itself into the larger web of betrayal and deceit surrounding joint stock. As James stared out at the sprawling cityscape, he realized this wasn't just about saving his company anymore. This was personal. Somewhere out there, Ashley Thomas was a key player in a game he hadn't fully grasped yet. And James wasn't one to leave mysteries unsolved. The journey ahead loomed daunting, filled with shadows and unknowns. Yet for the first time in days, James felt a spark of determination flare within him. He would uncover the truth, no matter how deep he had to dig or how far he had to go. The sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long streaks of light across his office. James Thomas stood at the crossroads of a battle that would test not just his skills as a businessman, but the very essence of who he was. Somewhere, in the vast maze of the city, Ashley Thomas carried the answers, and James was resolved to find them. The real battle was just beginning, and James Thomas was ready to meet it head-on. Standing at the edge of his desk, his resolve hardened into unyielding determination. Reaching for his phone, he dialed a number that had remained untouched in his contacts for years. "Jack," James said firmly as the call connected. "It's James Thomas. I need your help with something, and it needs to stay discreet." There was a pause as the voice on the other end responded with a sharp, no-nonsense tone. "How soon can you meet me?" James pressed. Another brief pause, followed by confirmation. James nodded to himself. "Good, I'll see you in an hour. And Jack," he added, his voice steady and deliberate, "come prepared. We have a mystery to unravel." As he set the phone down, James felt a complicated mix of anticipation and apprehension. The stakes were higher than they'd ever been, and the journey he was about to embark on promised to either salvage everything he'd built or shatter it into irreparable fragments. Yet, one thing remained clear: James Thomas wouldn't rest until he uncovered the truth, no matter the personal cost. The bustling streets of Washington, D.C., blurred into a haze outside the windows of James's sleek black sedan. He sat in the back seat, his posture rigid, his gaze fixed on the cityscape rushing past. Yet his thoughts were miles away, consumed by the puzzle that had thrown his life into disarray. "Where to?" Mr. Thomas Thomas, his loyal chauffeur of many years, asked from the driver's seat. "The Gry Park Hotel," James replied, his tone distant, his mind already calculating the steps ahead. "I'm meeting an old friend." The sedan wove expertly through the crowded streets, carrying James toward what felt like the first chapter of a new and uncertain story. As they approached the stately Gry Park Hotel, its historic facade standing in quiet contrast to the chaos of the city, James straightened his tie, adjusting his suit jacket with a steadying breath. This was no ordinary meeting. It was the beginning of an investigation that could reshape his understanding of everything: his company, his relationships, and the forces at play in his world. James knew what awaited him inside wasn't just answers, it was the start of a battle for the truth. The hotel lobby exuded a quiet sophistication. Dark wooden accents and soft, muted tones enveloped the space. James Thomas scanned the room, his gaze settling on a familiar figure seated in the far corner of the bar. Jack Donovan hadn't changed much in the years since James had last seen him. Lean and wiry, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to dissect everything they observed, Jack rose from his seat as James approached. "James," Jack greeted, extending a hand. "It's been a while." James accepted the handshake with a nod, sliding into the booth opposite his old friend. "Too long, Jack. Thanks for agreeing to meet on such short notice." Jack waved away the gratitude with a casual flick of his hand. "When James Thomas calls, you answer. So what's going on?" Leaning forward, James lowered his voice to ensure their conversation remained private. "What I'm about to share doesn't leave this room, Jack. I need your word on that." Jack's demeanor shifted instantly, his expression hardening with seriousness. "You have it. Let's hear it." Over the next hour, James unraveled the tangled web of events: the heart attack, the mysterious nurse named Ashley, the conspiracy brewing within Joint Stock, and the unanswered questions that haunted him day and night. Jack listened intently, his brow furrowing deeper with each revelation. He sat back only when James concluded, letting out a low whistle. "That's one hell of a story, James. And you're sure this nurse Ashley, right, isn't tied to the board scheming?" James shook his head. frustration evident in his expression. I've analyzed it from every angle. No one on the board seems to know anything about her. It's like she materialized out of nowhere, warned me, and then disappeared without a trace. Jack leaned back in his chair, his sharp eyes glinting with focus as he processed the information. All right, he began, his tone decisive. Let's tackle this step by step. First, we need to figure out who this Ashley really is. You said the hospital has no record of her. None, James confirmed, frustration creeping into his voice. I've called multiple times, spoken directly with HR, even sent Emily to follow up in person. It's like Ashley never existed. Jack nodded, flipping open a worn leather notebook. Okay, let's start with what you do know. Tell me everything you can remember: her age, height, anything distinct about her appearance or demeanor. James closed his eyes for a moment, conjuring up the vivid image of Ashley's face. She looked to be in her mid to late 20s. Petite, around 5A or 5A, brown hair, warm brown eyes, and there was something about her eyes, familiar somehow, but I can't put my finger on it. Jack scribbled furiously, occasionally pausing to clarify details. Anything else? An accent? A specific way she carried herself? She spoke with confidence, like someone who knew more than they let on, James added. It wasn't just the words she said, it was the way she said them. Like she was trying to warn me without revealing too much. Jack tapped his pen against the notebook, deep in thought. It's not much, but it's a start. I'll run her description through some databases, see if we get any hits. Maybe she's not who or what she seemed to be. James nodded, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. Good. While you're at it, I'd like you to dig into global communications. Their sudden interest in a merger doesn't sit right with me. They've been our fiercest competitor for years, and now they're playing nice. It doesn't add up. Jack's lips curved into a knowing smirk. I was thinking the same thing. I've got a few contacts in corporate intelligence who owe me favors. I'll see if there's been any chatter about Global making big moves or unusual alliances. As their conversation continued, the weight of uncertainty that had been pressing on James for days began to lift. For the first time since this storm had engulfed his life, he felt like he wasn't fighting it alone. He had an ally, someone he could trust to help uncover the truth and dismantle the web of deceit that threatened everything he had built. There's one more thing, Jack, James said, his voice tinged with both uncertainty and resolve as their meeting drew to a close. I can't shake the feeling that Ashley is tied to this somehow, not just the corporate intrigue, but something deeper, something personal. Jack leaned forward, studying James with the practiced eye of someone who had seen too many secrets unravel. What makes you think that? He asked, his tone even but probing. James shook his head, frustration flickering across his face. I don't know. It's just a gut feeling. The way she looked at me, the urgency in her voice, it didn't feel like a nurse simply worried about her patient. It felt like she knew me, like it mattered to her beyond professional duty. Jack sat back, his fingers drumming thoughtfully on the table. You've always had good instincts, James. If there's a connection, we'll uncover it. I'll dig deeper into her background while we work on the rest. James nodded, the weight of the mystery pressing heavier on him, but tempered by the relief of having Jack on his side. Thanks, Jack. I trust you'll keep this discreet. Jack gave a small, reassuring smile. You know I will. We'll figure this out. As James stepped out of the elegant lobby of the Gry Park Hotel, the crisp air of Washington, D.C. greeted him. Determination burned in his chest, fueling his steps as he climbed into his waiting car. The mystery surrounding Ashley wasn't just another obstacle, it was the key to unlocking something bigger, something he couldn't yet define. The answers he sought were out there, waiting to be uncovered. And for the first time in days, James felt ready to face whatever truths lay ahead. I've learned to trust your instincts, James, Jack said, his voice steady as he closed his notebook. If you think there's a personal angle to this, we'll dig into it. Is there anyone from your past who might have a reason to get involved in something like this? An old flame, A family member you've lost touch with. James's thoughts churned as he sifted through the people in his past. Try as he might, nothing stood out. I can't think of anyone, he admitted, shaking his head. My parents are long gone. No siblings. I've had relationships, sure, but none that ended in a way that would explain this level of involvement. Jack gave a curt nod, his sharp mind clearly already working through other angles. All right. Let's not rule it out just yet, but for now, we'll focus on the leads we can chase down. I'll start digging into Ashley's background and see what I can uncover about Global Communications' recent moves. You concentrate on keeping joint stock steady and keeping your eyes open, whoever's behind this. They've already proven they can move under the radar. James stood as Jack did, their longtime camaraderie evident in the way Jack placed a hand on James's shoulder, a gesture of solidarity and reassurance. We'll get to the bottom of this, James, just like the old days, huh? A faint smile tugged at the corners of James's mouth. Just like the old days. Thanks, Jack, I mean it. I couldn't do this without you. Jack grinned, his sharp wit breaking the tension in the air. Oh, you owe me plenty already, James. But who's keeping track? They parted ways, each man carrying the weight of what lay ahead, but James felt lighter knowing he had Jack in his corner. As he stepped outside into the brisk Washington air, a new determination settled over him. The fight was far from over, but with Jack's help, he would uncover the truth, no matter how deeply it was buried. As James watched Jack disappear into the bustling Washington crowd, a renewed sense of purpose settled over him. The mystery surrounding Ashley and the conspiracy at Joint Stock remained tangled, but for the first time, he felt as though he was moving in the right direction. Back at the Joint Stock headquarters, James dove headfirst into damage control. He spent endless hours in back-to-back meetings, calming jittery investors, mending relationships with high-priority clients, and strategizing with the remaining board members to rebuild trust and steer the company onto a stable path. Late in the evening, James finally allowed himself a moment of respite. He stood at the wide windows of his office, gazing out at the cityscape illuminated by countless lights against the darkened sky. His phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was a text from Jack. Found something interesting. Meet tomorrow, same place, 8 a.m. James's pulse quickened. What could Jack have discovered? Was it about Ashley, or did it have to do with Global Communications? The possibilities swirled in his mind, each one laced with both hope and trepidation. His eyes drifted to his desk, where a framed photo caught his attention. It was an old snapshot taken in the early days of Joint Stock. He and Joseph stood outside their modest first office, arms slung around each other's shoulders, their faces bright with the naive optimism of young entrepreneurs brimming with ambition. The photo tugged at James's memory. Something about Ashley's eyes, their warmth, their uncanny familiarity niggled at the edge of his mind. Was there a connection he had overlooked, something deeply tied to his past? James shook his head, attempting to dispel the haze of fatigue and unanswered questions. He was sure there was a critical piece missing, a hidden key that could unravel the entire mystery and bring clarity to the chaos. Tomorrow, with Jack's insight and expertise, James was determined to find that missing piece and finally begin to piece it all together. The early morning sun spilled over the streets of Washington, casting long, dramatic shadows as James Thomas made his way to the historic Gry Park Hotel. His thoughts swirled in a chaotic storm, fragments of theories, memories, and possibilities, each one tantalizingly close to revealing the truth he so desperately sought. Inside the hotel's dimly lit bar, Jack Donovan was already waiting in their familiar corner booth. A steaming cup of coffee rested in front of him, along with a thick manila folder that practically hummed with promise. "Morning," James Jack greeted, sliding a second cup of coffee across the table. "Looks like you could use this." James nodded his thanks, taking a long, fortifying sip before settling into the booth opposite Jack. "What do you have for me?" he asked, his tone as steady as he could manage. Jack's sharp blue eyes gleamed with seriousness as he flipped open the folder. I've got good news and, let's call it intriguing news. Where do you want to start? Let's hear the good news first, James said, bracing himself for the revelations to come. Jack nodded, extracting a stack of documents from the folder and laying them neatly on the table. I dug into Global Communications' recent moves. Turns out they've been quietly expanding their corporate footprint, acquiring smaller tech firms, ramping up research and development, and most notably, lobbying heavily in Washington. They've been making power plays left and right. But here's the kicker, none of it seems to align with their usual modus operandi. James leaned forward, scanning the documents as Jack continued. They're taking risks. James, big ones. Pushing boundaries in ways that suggest they're gearing up for something huge. That proposed merger with Joint Stock, it wasn't just opportunistic, it was strategic, calculated to align with some larger plan. But what's odd is how quickly they pivoted to target your company. Almost. Like someone inside was feeding them information. James's jaw tightened, the implications hitting hard. Someone on the inside, he repeated. That lines up with what I suspected. But why? What's their endgame? That Jack said, tapping the folder meaningfully, brings us to the interesting news. James met his gaze, a flicker of apprehension crossing his face. Go on. Jack slid a photograph across the table, a single name scrawled on the back. James's breath caught as he recognized it. Ashley Thomas. The room seemed to still as James stared at the photo, his mind racing. Ashley, the mysterious nurse who had warned him the woman who might hold the key to everything. What did you find? James asked, his voice taut with anticipation. Jack leaned in, his tone deliberate. She's not just connected to you, James, she's connected to them. And I think she knows more than she's letting on. Jack nodded, pulling out a neat stack of documents from the manila folder. I've uncovered some interesting developments regarding Global Communications, he began, his tone measured. It seems they've been systematically acquiring smaller tech companies over the past year, firms specializing in areas that align almost perfectly with Joint Stock's core technologies. James Thomas frowned deeply, the implications immediately sparking concern. They're assembling a portfolio to compete with us, James stated, his voice tinged with disbelief. Exactly, Jack confirmed, sliding the documents closer. But here's where it gets even more intriguing. These acquisitions were executed with precision, structured in ways designed to avoid drawing attention. If I hadn't been actively digging into their recent activities, this pattern might have gone completely unnoticed. James leaned back in the booth, his thoughts racing as he absorbed the information. So he began slowly piecing it together. Global wasn't pursuing a merger for synergy. They were orchestrating a complete takeover. Jack's expression darkened, and he nodded. That's exactly what it looks like. If the merger had been approved, they'd have all the assets they needed to dismantle Joint Stock, stripping it for parts and effectively neutralizing their most significant competitor in one decisive move. James's jaw tightened, the weight of betrayal settling over him like a heavy cloak. The actions of his board members now seemed even more damning, their collusion aiding and abetting an insidious corporate strategy. Good work, Jack James said finally, his voice steady but laced with simmering determination. This information could be the key to protecting Joint Stock and ensuring this company stays intact. We're going to need every scrap of it. Jack leaned forward, his piercing gaze meeting James's. We're not done yet. There's more to uncover, and we'll need to act fast. Global's playing a long game, but now we're ahead of their next move. James nodded, his resolve hardening. Then let's make sure their plans fall apart before they ever take shape. Jack's words hung in the air like a thunderclap, their weight settling heavily on James Thomas. He stared at the photograph, his mind struggling to catch up with the bombshell that had just been dropped. My daughter, James whispered, his voice barely audible. His hands trembled slightly as he picked up the photo, examining the face that now felt both familiar and foreign. Jack nodded, his expression solemn. "Yes, James, I triple-checked the records. Emily Parker is the daughter of Barbara Parker." The name hit James like a second blow. Barbara Parker. The woman who had once been the love of his life. A relationship that had ended in heartbreak and unresolved questions decades ago. Barbara, James murmured, his voice thick with emotion. Memories flooded his mind, laughter, shared dreams, and the pain of their sudden parting. He looked back at the photograph, the pieces of the puzzle finally beginning to click into place. "How could I not have known?" James asked, his voice rising. "Why didn't she tell me?" Jack leaned forward, his voice calm but insistent. "James, I don't have all the answers. But I can tell you this: Emily didn't just show up at that hospital by chance. She knew who you were. She was trying to protect you." James's chest tightened, a mixture of guilt and anger swirling inside him. "And Barbara, is she?" Jack shook his head slowly. "Barbara passed away a few years ago. Cancer. Emily's been on her own since then, putting herself through nursing school." James sank back into his chair, the weight of Jack's words crushing. "She's been out there all this time," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "And I didn't even know." Jack placed a hand on James's shoulder. "What matters now is what you do next. Emily reached out to you, James. She risked everything to warn you. That means she's trying to connect, to bridge the gap. You have a second chance to be part of her life. Don't waste it." James nodded slowly, his resolve hardening. The corporate conspiracy, the betrayal of his board, those battles still raged. But this was personal. This was about family. "I need to find her," James said, his voice steady, despite the storm of emotions within him. "I need to talk to her. I need to make this right." Jack smiled faintly, his eyes glinting with encouragement. "We'll find her, James. And when you do, you'll know exactly what to say." As James stared at the photograph once more, the image of Emily Parker, his daughter, he felt something he hadn't in years: hope. For all the battles ahead, this was the one he couldn't afford to lose. The air in the room felt heavy as James Thomas stared at the birth certificate, his world shifting with each passing second. The document trembled in his hands, a concrete reminder of a truth he had never imagined. "My daughter," James whispered, the words foreign and raw. "Samantha. I never knew. She told me she lost the baby." Jack Donovan, sitting across from him, watched his old friend carefully, his expression a mixture of sympathy and resolve. "It seems she didn't lose the baby, James. From what I've uncovered, Samantha's mother, Sharon, intervened. She forced Samantha to cut ties with you and raise Emily alone." James set the birth certificate down, his fingers tracing over the name Emily Parker. His mind was flooded with memories of Samantha, her laughter, her fierce spirit, the love they had shared during those fleeting college years. And now, learning that she had borne him a daughter, a child he had never known, left him grappling with a whirlwind of emotions. "And Samantha?" James asked, his voice catching. "She's gone." Jack nodded solemnly. "She passed away 5 years ago. Cancer. Emily's been on her own since then, working her way through nursing school." James leaned back in his chair, the weight of the revelation almost too much to bear. The thought of Emily, his daughter, growing up without him, losing her mother, and now stepping into his life under such mysterious circumstances, was overwhelming. "Why would she come to me now?" James asked, his voice laced with both confusion and longing. "She warned me about the board meeting. Why not just tell me who she is?" Jack spread his hands, his eyes filled with understanding. "That's still a question we don't have an answer for. But she didn't just warn you out of coincidence, James. There's something more going on here." James's jaw tightened as his resolve hardened. "I need to find her, Jack. I need to know why she came to me, why she kept her identity a secret." Jack slid a slip of paper across the table. "This is her last known address. But Jack said gently, "You need to be ready for whatever you find. This won't be easy for either of you." James took the address, folding the paper carefully and slipping it into his pocket. He looked Jack in the eye, determination blazing in his gaze. "I don't care how hard it is. She's my daughter. I owe her the truth, and I owe her a father." As James rose from the table, the weight of years lost settled over him, but so did a glimmer of hope. For all the chaos swirling around him, the conspiracy had joined stock. The betrayal of those he trusted, this felt like a chance to reclaim something pure, something that truly mattered. He turned to Jack. "Thank you for everything. I'll let you know what I find." Jack nodded, his voice steady. "Good luck, James. And remember, whatever happens, you're not in this alone." With a deep breath, James left the hotel, stepping into the early morning sunlight. The city around him bustled with life, but for the first time in days, James's focus was clear. He had a daughter to find, and nothing corporate intrigue, personal fears, or the ghosts of the past was going to stand in his way.